So good afternoon, everyone. My name's Colin and I'm the manager of FLIP, which is the Flexible Learning Innovation Projects team within CQUniversity's Learning Design and Innovation Directorate. So my challenge for this presentation was to use minimal slides and minimal text, which is the exact opposite to my instincts. So this could be interesting. So this presentation is far from a complete story of the hyperflexible journey and is just reporting on some of the challenges we've had and some of the challenges we still have and why we think this is a useful innovation in the regional university context, some of which Amy has already touched on, which is great. So rather than starting with the rationale for why we've developed the hyperflexible model the way we have, I'm going to start by describing what we've done to date and some of the challenges before talking about the research and thinking, some of which is telling us that increased flexibility for CQUniversity students in particular is very important. Now, I think this better conveys the messiness of the design approach and the design thinking that's been our experience for the last few years in developing this hyperflexible platform. Now, I should add that when I'm talking about hyperflexibility in this presentation, I'm talking about genuine choice for students in reference to time, place, and pace, and not just what marketing departments across the sector refer to as flexibility, which is usually a variation on place or distance. So CQUniversity has developed what we're calling our hyperflexible learning platform called Be Different. Be Different is a bespoke Moodle platform that has been set up to support a curriculum design for fully online and self-regulated learning, and it was launched back in 2018. So students can enroll at any time. They can apply, and once admitted, they can enroll into their units and begin their studies straight away. So students are self-paced. Each course has an overarching time limit, and generally these limits are quite generous. So for example, the MBA leadership students on the platform have 5 years to complete 11 units, with the 11th unit being a double credit point capstone unit. So there are no terms, there are no assessment due dates, there's no Moodle discussion forums, and there's no residential schools. Basically, this platform has been developed as a hat tip to improved flexibility for our postgraduate students. So the platform was launched back in 2018 with a group of MBA leadership pilot students, and up until the start of 2020, it was exclusively for full fee paying students only, with no fee help or Commonwealth support available. So this changed at the start of 2020 when all courses were made available to Commonwealth supported students. And we added 2 new courses at that time, around about March 2020, a graduate certificate in mental health nursing that transitioned from term-based Moodle, and a brand new Masters of Educational Neuroscience. What we've found is that student behaviours on the platform look very different to student behaviours on normal term-based Moodle platform. We've also noticed that student behaviours prior to the introduction of Commonwealth support are also very different from those behaviours for students with Commonwealth support. And that's interesting. We need to dig into some research to figure out why that's so. But basically, the progress and completion rates for students prior to the introduction of fee help is generally quite patchy, which is something that also needs some further research to unpack. So however, for this presentation, I'll be reporting on the 3 main Be Different courses post the start of 2020, all of which are growing in terms of student numbers. So I'll start with the MBA leadership. So it's an 11-unit master's level MBA focusing on producing graduates with leadership skills. Now, despite a very crowded MBA marketplace in Australia, the MBA leadership admissions have grown from 338 students at the start of 2020 to 944 students in just 22 months. So that's a growth rate of around about 180%. Now, the 4-unit graduate certificate of mental health nursing has grown from 12 students back in March last year to 337 students in a little over 12 months, which is a growth rate of around about 330%. And we also added the Masters of Educational Neuroscience, which was a brand new course, and it was launched in March last year, and it's currently sitting on around about 130 students. Now, I should add that these growth rates are with little to no marketing, particularly with the MBA leadership. But the mental health nursing numbers have probably been boosted artificially by some government incentives inside the public health system. But that works in our favour, and that's all good. So it's also worth adding that we've added exit and interim awards to the MBA leadership, and we have around about an additional 50 students or so who are enrolled directly into the nested grad cert or graduate diploma. So we've currently got around about 1,800 students admitted into courses on the platform, and we're finding anecdotally that the self-paced nature of the courses is a key factor in student decisions to study these postgraduate courses at CQU. So since the start of last year, there's been close to 15,000 assignment submissions completed on the platform, and we've had just over 100 student graduations. Now this year, we're averaging over 70 new students per month to the platform, although last month was our quietest month of the year in terms of admissions with only 44 new students. So all of this sounds pretty good, right? But it's not all been wine and cheese, that's for sure. We've had a bunch of challenges and we've had a bunch of problems still to solve, and I'll highlight just some of these. So I mentioned before how student behaviours are quite different from what we've come to expect with term-based Moodle students. And with term-based Moodle units, terms are open for 12 weeks and we make them available to students 2 weeks prior to the official start of term. So students have access to their unit materials for 98 days roughly. Now, on average, self-paced students on Be Different submit their first assignment 105 days after they enrol into a unit. Now, strangely, subsequent submissions are usually made within 2 weeks and then in 2 weeks increments from there on in. So that's a really interesting pattern we're drilling into at the moment. On average, our students are taking around about 150 days to finish each unit, although there's so much variation in that average that it's essentially meaningless. So don't read too much into that one. However, it is apparent that students are not progressing through their units and their courses at a linear rate. They tend to start slow and speed up as they progress inside of each unit, but we're also seeing that pattern repeated across the course. And this is a real headache for us for a whole range of reasons. So for example, at the organisational level, measures of financial income of courses is calculated term by term and year by year. That our students are progressing more slowly through their units and therefore their courses means that our income per student per year is generally less than with term-based Moodle, although this has been somewhat mitigated by the rapid growth in student numbers on the platform. However, this is going to be an ongoing battle, so balancing out that need for income with the need for more flexible options for our students, it's not a problem that's going to go away anytime soon. So at the governance and systems level, we've also had to deal with a whole range of problems. So for example, the HESA Act, Higher Education Standards Act, says that census dates can be no less than 20% of the unit's availability period. So we've had to set unit availabilities to 1 year, and that means a census date of around about 74 days based on each individual student's enrolment date. Student 1, our student information system, was designed around the term and semester model of teaching, and it doesn't allow grades to be certified within this period, which is really annoying for those students who are advancing rapidly through their units, and we do have a few of those. So add to this an incoming change to government funding and reporting requirements is going to mean that students not finishing their units within that 12-month availability period may mean we won't get funded for that student. So this is a real challenge we're starting to focus on right now. Now, aside from a whole host of these sorts of nuanced issues, we've also had to develop some systems to support the self-paced model, because all of our existing systems that help us to administer our learning and teaching are predicated on term-based delivery and are incompatible when admission and enrolment dates are specific to each individual student. This is something that Amy was touching on. So together with digital services, we've had to develop a course management dashboard that allows our course teams to access much of the data they need to monitor student progress, student enrolment dates, assessment completions, and assignment marking, and those sorts of things. Now, we've also had to develop a bespoke marker allocation system within Moodle that automatically assigns completed assessments to markers and takes much of the heavy lifting out of marker management from the course teams, which has been a real success. And we're actually looking at how that might be applicable in the higher education context for anyone who's interested. The other thing is assignments on our platform don't come through in the peaks and troughs that we're used to seeing with term-based Moodle. They tend to come through in a steady stream, and anywhere between 10 to 20 assignment submissions per day across all courses. And this has got its own sort of pros and cons as well, but it's an interesting pattern nonetheless. So getting back to the challenge of student progress, which I think is probably our greatest challenge, monitoring student progress in a self-paced environment is a real challenge, and we're looking to develop tools and processes for the course teams at 3 broad levels. So the first level is at the unit engagement level, which is basically the consistency of student activity within units. We're finding that some students are accessing their units regularly, while others disappear for months on end before getting back into it. Now, we're proposing a process whereby we make contact with students after a predefined period of time, of inactivity, I mean. So for example, after 6 weeks of inactivity, we could send them an email. After 12 weeks of inactivity, it might trigger a phone call from the course teams, but we need to be helping the students stay on task. Now, the second relates to what I've just talked about and relates to unit progress and getting those students through within the 12-month period. So for example, at 6 months after 6 months of students being enrolled in a unit, we run an automated check for assignment submission activity, and again at 9 months. This is us checking that the student is making progress to the unit and is on target to finish that unit within 12 months. So we need to be really helping those students to complete each unit within those government prescribed 12-month deadlines. And this also links to the third layer, which is probably my most fascinating layer. The third layer is the course level progress. And this is where at the anniversary of each student's admission to the course, we evaluate their progress to check that they're progressing quick enough to finish within the course's prescribed deadline. Now, we've based this off the monitoring academic progress model, and together with digital services, we're looking at what we can do to keep the students on track to complete within the prescribed timelines. One of the options that I'm particularly interested in here is how we might deploy student-facing learning analytics to make the course level progress, goal setting, and tracking more visible for each individual student. So that could be a fun little project. So look, there's a whole bunch of challenges to overcome if we want to provide students with this sort of flexibility, which begs the question, do our students really need this degree of flexibility? And I'll address this with a brief rundown on CQ and why it is unique within the Australian higher education sector. I say unique because as a university, we have the highest proportions of students from groups that are known to struggle with higher education. And while this is something we're immensely proud of, it can also be quite the headache for us. And I also think it's important to understand who our students are, as it can be a useful driver for learning and teaching related innovations such as the hyperflexible model. So in other words, considering our student cohort and the challenges they face can be a useful place to start when we're thinking about our fundamental delivery models and the role of technology in these delivery models. So a couple of examples of why we need to be thinking about our student cohort when considering the next steps with our delivery models. So the national average for students coming from low socioeconomic backgrounds is 18%. The average for regional universities, identified by the 7 regional university network universities, is 29%. At CQU, 50% of our students come from low socioeconomic backgrounds, which is more than twice the national average. Now, where this gets particularly interesting for me is when we start talking about regional and remote students, and we all heard Sherre talk about regional remote students earlier on. Now, these students will often be represented in multiple equity groups or multiple groups that are known to struggle completions with higher education. So the national average for the proportion of students coming from regional or remote areas is 22%. The regional university network universities, it's 48%. At CQU, almost 70% of our students come from regional or remote areas. And I'll just touch on why this is such an important number for us. So according to the literature, students from regional and remote areas and students from these groups will have lower completion rates than metropolitan university students. These students face structural challenges in accessing, participating in and completing higher education and are disadvantaged by things like geographic locations, financial constraints, and a host of other socio-cultural factors. Now, furthermore, these disadvantages are not mutually exclusive and compound to make things even more difficult for the students. Now, our Vice-Chancellor published an article last year that was picked up by the ABC News, and I'll just read an excerpt that I think neatly captures the plight of the majority of our students here at CQU. He said, So why is it that as regional Australians, we indeed expect, poorer health outcomes, lower life expectancies, inferior roads and infrastructure, reduced services, slower internet, public transport rations, fewer opportunities, and as we in the education sector are acutely aware, much lower levels of educational attainment, end quote. So to suffice to say that regional students are having a hard time of it, especially right now in light of COVID. We're not a University of Queensland, we're not a Monash or an ANU, where the students are predominantly, or comparatively, I guess, high achieving school leavers from affluent backgrounds who can afford to study full-time without the distractions that our generally older regional students face. So over 75% of CQUniversity students are aged over 24 years, and it's well known in the literature that the older you get, generally speaking, the more competing priorities you're going to have to juggle as a student. Now that said, CQUniversity's attrition rate last time I checked was only about 1% more than the average for the regional universities network, and I think this is probably an unrecognised achievement for us. But it's these competing priorities that our students constantly juggle as this translates into a need for more flexibility for our students, particularly flexibility as it relates to deadlines and factors relating to time. Now, standard practice in higher education involves the imposition of multiple deadlines on students each academic year, and many of these deadlines have repercussions whereby students are penalised for non-compliance. Assessment deadlines, enrol-by deadlines, admission deadlines, and so on and so forth. So we've counted over 40 discrete deadlines for the average part-time student over a single year of study. Now add to this that it's often the case that to get an exemption for many of these deadlines, we'll see the imposition of additional deadlines and a commitment of time to apply for the exemption when it's likely a deficit of time that led to the request in the first place. So from an administrative perspective, things like terms and all of these deadlines are imposed for legitimate purposes and help hold the chaos at bay. But do they benefit our students in particular? Have we struck the right balance between administrative convenience and delivery models that acknowledge the real-world complexities of our students' lives? So we think we've made a step in the right direction with the Hyperflexible model and platform, but we've also had to make compromises to fit the model into an ecosystem where the dominant paradigm is term-based delivery. So this is a rich area for us, and we will be conducting research to answer some of these questions and to guide our activities into the future. So here's some of the amazing people who are part of our Learning Design and Innovation Research Lab. That we've created this lab to help explore some of these hyper-flexible issues, amongst other things. And here are some of the citations that have backdropped many of the things I've talked about in this presentation. So thank you, everyone. That's all I had for the time being.